The inaugural Future Gov SAARC Summit of 2012 concluded in Colombo today. The chief guest at the summit today was Minister of Public Management Reforms, Naveen Dissanayake.
The first Future Government SAARC Summit, organised by the Information and Communication Technology Agency of Sri Lanka, or ICTA, commenced in Colombo yesterday. The two-day summit brought together an impressive lineup of international and local speakers.
ICT should be and is one of the main platforms for development. It is in fact mentioned in the Mahindra Chintana as a hub, a major hub in the policy document to develop so that the people of Sri Lanka can get the maximum benefit of ICT development. Our internet penetration rate is around 10%, plus or minus 2%, is not adequate for an emerging country like Sri Lanka. So then the government has to invest its own funds in the backbone, the main infrastructure of the IT sector, and secondly, my private view, a much more dynamic liberalization aspect to get private investment to come and invest in the backbone.
So ICT is only a vehicle. I don't want to say that ICT is a silver bullet. So my contention, therefore, is that no amount of ICT can reform a government unless the government wants to reform itself. Right? So otherwise it will be only lip service unless the government sincerely wants to reform itself.
IMF resident representative Koshi Mathai says that the steps taken by the government to reduce the budget deficit over the years is commendable. He noted that the government had succeeded in reducing the debt burden as a percentage of GDP. However, the opposition charges that the government is increasing the debt burden by obtaining huge loans on high interest rates.
The government spending and revenue situation has been a major weakness of the Sri Lankan economy for years and years and years. The overall fiscal balance was in deficit from 2005 onwards, I'm showing, around a 7% of GDP deficit, expanding to about 10% in 2009, but after that we see a steady improvement to 8%, 6.75%, heading for 6.25% this year. And along with that tightening of the fiscal deficit, the flow deficit year from year, we are seeing an improvement in the stock of debt. The government deserves a lot of credit for tightening their fiscal policies. The other point is that it's not all coming through their efforts. Part of it is coming, a good part of it is coming through the automatic debt dynamics in this country. And what do I mean by that? I mean simply the fact that Sri Lanka is blessed with a relatively low average real interest rate on its government. So what the Sri Lankans have done, the authorities have done, is to avoid that big deficit every year and let the natural dynamics play their course, take their natural course, and bring the debt down. So debt is headed in the right direction, but an important point to make is that we are still very much an outlier.
We're also a country which has kept afloat basically by borrowing heavily in the international markets. The debt in the year 2000 was $9 billion US. By 2009, it was $18 billion US. And by the end of 2012, it can become $27 billion US. So there is a rapid growth in the quantum of debt. And the other thing with the debt is that debt in the past was largely concessional borrowings. Now they are market borrowings which are coming at extremely high rates compared to international lending rates. The reserve position was very weak and bolstered by the International Monetary Fund when Sri Lanka signed an IMF agreement, and that has brought us out of the woods in the short term. But more recently, we frittered away our reserves trying to defend the parity of the Sri Lankan rupee unnecessarily, until in the last budget, instead of the central bank, the government of the country had to step in and the finance minister announce a depreciation of the rupee.
Action TV yesterday revealed the report formulated following an investigation carried out by the Presidential Investigation Unit, according to the letter that was forwarded to the President by the former Director of the Medical Supplies Division on the 6th of June 2010. The investigation was carried out over the purchase of surgical equipment by the Health Services Director General. The investigation report included 8 observations, out of which one was that it was clear that funds had been allocated for the purchase in question, which was made targeting nutritional needs. 18.2 million rupees had been allocated for the purchase. According to the report, 5 charges had been levelled against the Health Services Director General. The Secretary to the President had submitted the investigation report to the Secretary to the Ministry of Health on the 15th of October 2011. A request has been made through the covering letter sent along with the letter to the Health Ministry Secretary. This was to initiate disciplinary action against the officials who were found to be involved in the transaction. However, the Secretary to the Health Ministry, who disregarded the request made by the President's Secretary throughout a period of 7 months, has now been appointed as the Secretary of another ministry. At a media briefing that was held today, the Health Services Trade Unions Federation expressed their stance regarding those involved in corruption and malpractice. If someone has done something wrong, he or she should be punished. We will not try to cover it up at any time. Everyone is aware that I have informed if a nurse has done an offence to punish her. I am saying this without any fear because we cannot correct her.
We start things off with some bad news for Sri Lankan cricket fans as the Zimbabwe A team secured an 8-wicket win against the Sri Lankan A team with 188 balls remaining in the 6th match of a tri-series also involving the South African A team in Harare today. Now batting first, Sri Lanka were bundled out for 81 runs in 26 overs thanks to Elton Chikumbura, who picked up 6 wickets for 24 runs. Chasing an easy target, Zimbabwe stormed to victory in 18.4 overs with Vusi Sibanda making an unbeaten 43 runs.
Meanwhile, the Indian cricket team was seen practicing at the Mahinda Rajapaksa Stadium in Suryawewa, Hambantota this evening. The Indians, led by skipper Mahendra Singh Dhoni, who arrived in the island yesterday, will take on Sri Lanka in their first one-day international on Saturday. This is the first time India will be playing a one-day international at the Mahinda Rajapaksa Stadium in Hambantota. The second one-day between India and Sri Lanka will be played at the Mahinda Rajapaksa Stadium in Hambantota on the 24th of this month. The Indians are touring the island for 5 ODIs and 1 T20 encounter. The first ODI to be played at the Mahinda Rajapaksa Stadium was a preliminary round match between Sri Lanka and Canada in the 2011 ICC Cricket World Cup on February 20th. The stadium has hosted 4 ODI matches so far.
In more sports news, the contractor for the newly laid synthetic track at the Sugadasa Stadium, Dharmasri Rahubadhe, accepted that there are some issues with the track. He added that the shortcomings in the track will be addressed before the end of the month and the track will be handed over to the Sugadasa National Sports Complex Authority. However, the synthetic track was open for use at the recently concluded Asian Junior Athletics meet.
Various parties raised questions over the past few days about the standard of the newly laid synthetic track at the Sugadasa Stadium. A media briefing was convened today to discuss these matters. If there are certain problems, then it should be rectified. They should inspect it and hand it over. We can release the required funds only once the engineer or the engineering director hands it over and certifies it. Even if it's released, the retention money will be held back. Therefore, they are bound to it. Following the conclusion of the media briefing, the journalists were allowed to inspect the synthetic track. The journalists identified the shortcomings in the synthetic track in this manner.
And on that note, we wrap up this edition of News First Primetime News. To follow up on any of the stories that we air tonight, simply log on to www.newsfirst.lk. I'm Ramesh Urugal Bandara.
And I'm Krishna Panditaratna. Good night.
Good night.